G'day viewers, how you going? Hope you are well. Just sharing a little video with you. Seeing some comments, online or whatever, Google News or some news report or whatever, of someone who came out here to Australia from Europe and was very scathing about Australian culture. Saying it was harsh, it was brutal, we're overrating ourselves, all this kind of stuff. Very negative about Australia. Well, it's easy to do that. It's very easy to be negative about Australia and Australian culture. But you have to understand the historical perspective of Australia to understand Australian culture. Because it's not like Europe, it's not like England, it's not like America, it's none of those places. It's its own individual place. And believe you me, Australia is not an easy place, was not an easy place for people to survive, and that has what's shaped its modern day culture today. Because yes, we were once a British prison colony. That's correct. So probably 9 out of 10 Australians today, don't quote me on the statistics, but there's a high percentage of people who call themselves Australian today from an Anglo-Saxon or Celtic or whatever background, and they have some ties to convicts that were sent out from the United Kingdom. I myself personally have a tie to a convict that I've researched and discovered through using Ancestry.com, but I'm not at all ashamed of that. In fact, I'm quite proud of it, because my ancestor was a survivor. He was an absolute survivor, and he was a pioneer within Australian society in the early days. He pioneered some things. He had a family. He was successful. He came out to Australia basically in desperation. He ended up committing a crime in desperation because of the Industrial Revolution that was sweeping through England and the UK at the time. So he had to turn to crime in order to survive, and then got transported to Australia. But then eventually it was realised that he was a person of good character. He married again, a second wife, started a new life here in Australia, went back to his traditional occupation of farming, had a successful life, and had another family, and was an entrepreneurial person, a pioneering person, and member of Australian society. So no, I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed of that. Okay? Because it's a Christian perspective that we will be hated by the world. Jesus was hated by the world, persecuted by the world, killed by this world. And he says that if the world hated him as Jesus, God, then it will hate you as a Christian who believes and follows Christ. So there's no shame in being hated by the world. In fact, a Christian should be proud of that. And Paul himself, Paul was one of Jesus' greatest apostles. He was blinded on the road to Damascus. He converted from a very violent, and anti-Christian Jewish sect. I believe he was a Pharisee, to becoming a Christian. And that was a conversion that took place on the road to Damascus, where he encountered our Lord Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus. And he was blinded by Jesus and then told to stop persecuting Christians and turn around. And that is what happened through miraculous events. And he became one of our greatest allies, the Apostle Paul. So having said that, getting back to my original point, which was the idea that. That's right, now I remember the Australian culture. Okay, so Australian culture, seemingly to the outsider, is harsh, it's brutal. It can be, I don't know, unfriendly, perhaps obnoxious, perhaps even violent. We could be considered larrikins, rebels, rogues, all this kind of stuff. Not sophisticated, not cultured, stuff like that compared to European cultures. But that is very harsh, a very harsh treatment of Australian culture. Because remembering back to the 2000 Olympics, when we put on display Australian culture for the world during the opening ceremony of the Sydney 2000 Olympics, you'll remember it was quite spectacular, and we have an amazing culture. A culture, a history that is something that I am personally very proud of. Yes, it's wild colonialism. Yes, it's part to do with a British convict establishment. Yes, it's to do with the Australian Aboriginal people that were the First Nations people. Yes, it's all those things. It's a war between cultures. It's a prison colony culture. It was to do with migration from different parts of the world, and you name it, they're all out here. Chinese people, European people, Germans at one point, which one of my ancestors was a German, or at least they were from Hanover, which was an old kingdom before the unification of Germany. They were out here, and they were some of the people that were the earliest and largest population groups in Australia, migration groups in Australia, the Germans, or Old World Germans, as we would think of them today historically. They formed the largest percentage of people, and they went to places like South Australia, where industries that they were familiar with started. They were involved in mining. They were obviously involved in beer and wine, production, hospitality industries like pubs and things, which is what my ancestor did. That's a part of Australian culture. But yes, you could say it's a brutal culture. Yes, we do have larrikins. Yes, we do knock each other. Because you know why? Because Australia is a harsh country. It's a big country. It's vast in size. It's really a large country because it's virtually the size of the United States of America. The USA itself is geographically in size not much bigger than Australia. The continent of Australia is about the size of that. It's about the same size as the USA. It's amazing, isn't it? And yet we only have 5 or 6 states and a couple of territories. Whereas they have 50 states crammed into this thing, and they have multi-millions of people, where we only have 26 million. So they have a massive population, huge subdivision into small states, whereas we are a massive land mass with a small population. Most of us are around the coast. And the inland parts of Australia are very arid, very barren, very tough to live in. Deserts, basically. Massive deserts, very harsh landscapes where people don't want to live and don't want to get involved in that attempt to live. So it's very different to a country like the United States of America. It's harsh and has a harsh history. Yes, it has grown up under British authoritarian sort of government rule. A convict past. A lot of prominent people in Australia today, as I say, have descended from convicts, and convicts that made good, that were pardoned, that started or established a lot of institutions in Australia and were successful people because they had a new lease at life. They had a new opportunity apart from the motherland, like England and places like that. So they had a new opportunity. Yes, they were larrikins. Yes, they were harsh people. Yes, they appeared to be uncultured to a certain extent because Australia was a harsh country. It was hard to survive here. It was brutal. Only the toughest survived. So you just have to understand that as an aspect of Australia. Australia is not an easy country, was not an easy country to survive in. And the kind of people that were sent out here were not from so-called upper classes. You know, they weren't versed in the refinements of upper classes. They weren't from wealthy backgrounds. That's not to say they were less cultured or less refined people. Not necessarily. I've met people from wealthy backgrounds and upper classes, and to be honest, some of them are very rude. They've been very rude, very arrogant people. Not modest, proud. So there's nothing great about that. There's nothing great about that. Being rude, being arrogant, being proud. That is not a great cultural aspect. And the layers of refinement that these people add on, a lot of it's BS. You know, it's BS. I've been to expensive restaurants and things like this. Have experienced this kind of 5-star lifestyle. And to be honest with you, these people are shallow. They're fragile. So what people consider as refined and mannered and stuff like that, they're fragile people. Because they've grown up or they've prospered in an environment where their fragile nature has been nurtured. Okay? They're like children. Or they're like eggs that have been handled very carefully. Because if you don't handle them carefully, they very easily crack. You know, they've been fed lies because they're pathetic and fragile people. So, Australians are not pathetic and fragile people. They don't need the bullshit of so-called, sophisticated culture and stuff like that. It's about survival here. It's about surviving because you are tough enough to do so. So yes, we have a culture where we knock each other. We give each other a hard time because that is what it is to be a survivor. Because the old adage, whatever does not kill you makes you stronger. That is the point of it. That is the essence of Australia, really. You've got to be tough to survive here. We have the worst snakes, the most poisonous snakes, the most spiders, the most poisonous spiders. So you can't be piss weak. You can't be somebody who's into refinements and culture because that's not going to get you anywhere in Australia. You have to be from the school of hard knocks, and that's what we are about. So get used to it. Understand it. Don't knock it, because if you knock it, we'll knock you back again. That's what we do, baby. God bless you. And God bless Australia. Yes, mate.